My stepmom's bed forced me to become her daughter. Hasn't wasn't your typical school senior. To most people, it was just another 18-year-old, one who had mastered the art of blending in. It wasn't particularly popular, nor was an outcast. It was just there. But underneath that calm exterior, Hassan harbored a secret so intimate, so personal, that no one could ever suspect its existence. Hassan loved to dress up as a woman. It wasn't about rebellion or some misguided desire to stand out. It was more about feeling something he couldn't express in his everyday life. When he slipped into a dress, applied makeup, and styled his hair, something inside him clicked. It felt like he could finally breathe, like it was being true to the part of him that no one could ever understand, until now. Hassan wasn't sure why he kept it a secret for so long. Maybe it was because of his conservative upbringing. Maybe it was the constant fear of judgment from friends or family, especially his father, who was about as traditional as they come. But that all changed when his dad remarried. Marianne had entered Hassan's life like a whirlwind. She was everything his dad wasn't, open-minded, stylish, and full of energy. It didn't take long for her to win his dad's heart, and soon enough, they were living together as a family. To Hassan, Marianne wasn't just his stepmother, she was a force of nature. At first, Hassan found her a bit overbearing. She was always offering unsolicited advice, questioning his choices, and trying to get him involved in family activities that he had no interest in. But beneath her commanding presence, Hassan also saw that she had a softer side. Marianne genuinely wanted to connect with him. She had a way of making everything feel like a challenge, though, a way of pushing him to test his boundaries. And while he resented her for it sometimes, there was an undeniable charm in the ways she could make him feel both challenged and cared for. Their home was an ordinary suburban house, nothing extravagant, but cozy enough for a family of 3. It was a place of routine, where everything had its place. Hassan's room, however, was different from the rest of the house. It was his sanctuary, the one place where he could be himself. At last, that's how it was said to be. Lately, though, things had begun to change. Hassan had found it harder to keep his secret from Marianne, who was always looking for ways to bond with him. And, more troubling, his own curiosity about how Marianne might react to his secret had been nagging at him for weeks. Hassan had a girlfriend, Emma, someone who, despite being in his life for over a year, had no idea about his crossdressing. To Emma, Hassan was just Hassan, a sweet, slightly introverted guy who liked to play video games, go to the movies, and spend time with her whenever he could. She had no idea about the part of him that wanted to explore femininity. He had never told her. The fear of rejection, the fear of losing her, kept him from sharing that truth. It was that Hassan didn't trust Emma, it was that he was terrified of her reaction. Emma, while open-minded in many ways, wasn't someone who'd ever shown any real interest in fashion or makeup, let alone gender expression. Hassan feared she wouldn't understand, wouldn't accept him, and that fear had kept him from being truly honest. One afternoon, Hassan found himself in a situation that would change everything. It was a Saturday, and they had just finished doing so much old work in his room when Marianne knocked on his door. She didn't wait for him to answer before entering, as was her habit, and took a seat on the edge of his bed. "Hassan," she began, her voice light but with a slight edge to it. "I've been thinking. We need to do something together. Something fun." Hassan, who had been sitting at his desk, turned to face her. "Like what?" "Well, you know how you're always hiding out in here? I thought maybe we could." Marianne stopped herself, a mischievous smile creeping onto her face. "I've got it. How about a bet?" "A bet?" Hassan raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. Marianne had a way of making everything seem like a game, but Hassan wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever challenge she had in mind. "Yep," she said, her tone playful. "You know how you've been into your little fashion experiments lately? I think it's time you showed me how good you really are. You have to become a girl, for a day. Just one day. Y ella even help you with the makeover. Hassan froze. And even expecting that. Cole felt his pulse kicking. The idea of dressing up in front of Marianne, no, the thought of her helping him, was too much. His throat tightened, and they stammered, "What do you mean? Become a girl." Marianne's eyes twinkled. "You know exactly what I mean. We pick out the clothes, the makeup, the whole thing. And if you can pull it off, I give you a prize." Hasson's mind raced. His worst fear was being caught. But the idea of winning a challenge, of being able to dress up without worrying about hiding it, was tempting. He felt both thrilled and terrified at the same time. Hasson knew he had a choice. He could refuse, make some excuse, and keep his secret hidden forever. Or he could take the plunge, embrace the challenge, and hope for the best. It was a dangerous game, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what would come next. But something inside him made him to take the chance. "I do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marianne's smile widened. "Good. I help you get ready. And Hasson, remember, no backing out now." Hasson had never been this close to fully revealing himself, and as Marianne's words echoed in his head, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and dread. The idea of dressing up in front of her, of being fully transformed into a girl with her help, was more overwhelming than he had imagined. For the first time, Hassan found himself questioning everything. Was this a step toward freedom? Or was it a dangerous game he was playing, one that could unravel everything he had carefully hidden from the world? The thrill he felt in anticipation of the makeover was tempered by a deep, nagging fear. As the day of the bed approached, Hassan spent his evenings in turmoil, unable to shake the image of himself in feminine clothes, his reflection in the mirror something he had never dared fully face. Was this an opportunity to express a side of him he had always kept under wraps, or would it feel like a betrayal of who he was, of everything his dad and the stepmom believed him to be? His mind raced with questions. Would Marianne think it was a joke? Would Sai laugh at him? What if the act of transformation didn't feel as good as it always had in private? The stakes were too big for him to back out now. But every time he looked at himself in the mirror, trying to envision the transformation, it felt more like walking into an unknown world. When the day finally came, Marianne was all too eager to help Hasson. She practically dragged him into the guest bedroom, her enthusiasm infectious. Hasson had never been inside that room before, and as he stepped inside, it felt like an outsider in his own home. This wasn't his space, yet it felt like it was about to become a place of reckoning. Marianne opened her closet and pulled out a few options: a soft, pastel-colored dress, a flowing skirt, and a tight blouse. She was meticulous, examining each piece as though it were a precious work of art. Hasson stood there, rooted to the spot, unsure whether to feel overwhelmed by the decision or amazed by her passion for the task at hand. This was not just about the clothes, he realized. It was about the act of transformation, the moment a would cross a line he could never uncross. "Here, let's start with this," Marianne said, holding up the pastel dress. She looked at Hasson as if waiting for him to protest. "When he didn't, she smiled. The soft fabric felt alien against Hasson's skin as he slipped the dress on. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. There was a warmth to it, a softness that made him feel vulnerable in ways he wasn't used to. But the fear that had gripped him began to fade as he started to accept the idea of being someone else, even if used for a day. Marianne's hands were gentle as she helped him adjust the dress, the neckline, the fit. She hummed lightly as she worked, not rushing him, allowing him the space to process what was happening. When the dress was in place, she moved on to the next step: makeup. Hasson had never been much of a makeup person. He had seen tutorials online, of course, but this was different. As Marianne applied foundation, concealer, and blush to his face, Hasson's reflection began to shift. His features, on the sharp and voice, began to soften. He couldn't help but stare at himself in the mirror, transfixed by the image that was slowly coming to life. His face looked different, more delicate, more feminine. The makeup had enhanced features he hadn't known were there, and they felt a flutter in his chest as he realized they didn't mind it. The mascara came next, lengthening his lashes. When Marianne added a swipe of lipstick, Jason's heart skipped. This wasn't just a transformation in appearance. It was a transformation in how I felt. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of power, not from his physical appearance, but from something deeper. The act of changing, of stepping into a new identity, felt intoxicating. But as I admired the final look, the thrill of the moment was interrupted by a thought, a fear that gnawed at him. Would Emma accept this side of him if she saw it? Would she even recognize him? Once the makeup was finished, Marianne's eyes sparkled with approval. You look amazing, she said. Now, for the finishing task. Jason felt a mix of pride and terror as Marianne pulled out a pair of heels from her closet. They were simple, black stilettos, but to Jason, they felt like a symbol of everything they had been hiding. Go ahead, Marianne encouraged. Try them on. Jason hesitated before slipping his feet into the shoes. The moment I stood up, I felt an unfamiliar sensation, a sense of elegance, of balance, but also a vulnerability that made him more self-aware than ever. It tittered slightly, but Marianne steadied him, a reassuring hand on his arm. There you go, she said. You look perfect. How does it feel? Jason took a few tentative steps, his heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The feeling was strange, but also thrilling. It wasn't just Jason anymore. It was someone else, someone who walked differently, someone who was seen differently. The power of the transformation started to sink in. But even as he moved, Jason couldn't shake the anxiety that gnawed at him. He had crossed a line. There was no going back from this. As Jason stood in front of the mirror, studying his reflection, his heart began to race. It looked nothing like the boy he had been used hours ago. The girl staring back at him was someone new, someone he didn't entirely recognize. And that's when it hit him. Emma would be home soon. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He had no idea how long a cold kept this act up. Would Emma notice the change in his voice? Would she question the makeup, the dress, the heels? Jason, you look incredible, Marianne said, her voice filled with admiration. But we have to hurry. You ain't to get upset to this persona if you want to win the bet. Jason's pulse weakened as he glanced at the clock. Time was running out. Just as Jason was beginning to feel comfortable in his new identity, the unexpected happened. The doorbell rang. Jason froze. His heart skipped a beat as his mind raced. Who could it be? Marianne's eyes widened in real astonishment, and she quickly motioned for Jason to stay quiet. Stay here, she whispered. I'll handle it. But it was too late. The sound of footsteps on the front porch confirmed that the visitor was already at the door. Jason's body tensed. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, as he did in that moment. It wasn't just cross-dressing for fun anymore, it was playing a dangerous game. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. Marianne rushed to the front door, but before she could even open it, Jason heard the unmistakable voice of his dad echoing from outside. Marianne, are you home? Jason's pulse spiked. His dad hadn't even expected to return until later, but here I was, standing at the doorstep. In an instant, the world Jason had carefully constructed for himself into brief moments of transformation seemed to crumble. He scrambled for a plan, for a way out. Should they run upstairs and hide? Should they try to explain what I was doing? But Marianne was already opening the door. Jason could hear her talking to his dad in the hallway, her voice light and casual, but Jason could tell she was hiding something. He couldn't make out the words, but the tension in her tone was palpable. There was no mistaking it. Something was off. Jason's mind raced. Could his dad know? Was there any way he could have discovered his secret? As he stood frozen in the bedroom, Jason's anxiety spiraled out of control. His heart pounded, and the heels seemed to dig into his feet as he passed the room. He couldn't help but feel like every single movement, every single breath, was being watched. Marianne was supposed to be his ally, but this sudden turn of events made him question everything. The minutes dragged on, each second more excruciating than the last. Hassan stood in front of the mirror again, trying to steady himself. He looked different now, more feminine, more beautiful, and yet somehow less like himself. His hair, styled perfectly, framed his face in a way he had never experienced before. His lips, painted with a soft pink gloss, shimmered as though they held secrets. His eyes, enhanced by makeup, seemed to stare back at him with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Hassan's hands trembled as he adjusted the hem of the dress, feeling the fabric slide against his skin. It was too late to change back now. He couldn't just peel the identity off like a piece of clothing. The transformation, both physical and emotional, had already taken root. He felt both exhilarated and terrified, a cocktail of emotions threatening to explode. But it was his dad's voice from downstairs that truly broke through his mental fog. He was talking to Marianne again, and this time, Hassan could make out some of the words. He thought Hassan was in his room. Why isn't he here? Hassan's blood ran cold. His dad was looking for him. He was starting to piece things together. And he was going to find him, dressed as a girl. At that moment, Hassan's eyes met his reflection in the mirror. The person staring back at him wasn't the boy he had been earlier that morning. It was someone else entirely, someone vulnerable, but also brave in a way he had never known. This transformation wasn't just about clothes. It was about identity, about pushing boundaries that had never been tested. Hassan's hand rested on the edge of the vanity as he gazed at himself, lost in thought. How had he gotten here? What had started as a bet had turned into something far more complicated, far more meaningful. The girl staring back at him was a reflection of his fears, his desires, and the parts of himself he had always kept hidden. But as he gazed at the mirror, he realized something. The person in the reflection, her lips, her eyes, wasn't someone he hated. She was someone he wanted to be. It didn't feel like a fraud. It felt like it was on the verge of discovering who it truly was. Hassan's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps ascending the stairs. His dad was coming. Hassan's breath caught in his throat. There was no time left. There was no way to undo everything that had been done. He stood frozen for a moment, then scrambled to gather his wits. He needed to act quickly. Should he hide in the closet? Should he dash to his room and change back into his regular clothes? Before he could make up his mind, the door to the guest room cracked open. Hassan spun around to see his dad standing in the doorway, his face contorted in confusion and surprise. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Hassan's heart pounded in his chest, and his legs felt like they were made of jelly. His dad blinked, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of his son dressed as a girl. It was just the clothes, it was the makeup, the hair, the entire transformation. For a moment, there was silence. Hassan opened his mouth, but no words came out. What is this? His dad asked, his voice shaky. Hassan, why are you dressed like that? Hassan's stomach twisted with fear. He opened his mouth again, but a cold money was a shaky breath. His dad wasn't angry, he was confused. But confusion could easily turn into something worse, and Hassan knew it. He had to say something, anything, before his dad could get the wrong idea. Guión bajo 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 guión. The art of the dilemma, soul the be himself. Hassan stood there, paralyzed by the weight of the moment. His dad had caught him. There was no denying it. But the question wasn't just about being caught. It was about what came next. Would his dad be supportive? Would they think Hassan had lost his mind? Or was this something deeper, something that Hassan had been struggling to understand himself? As the silence stretched on, Hassan's dad stepped forward, his expression softening. Son, Talk to me. What's going on? The words Jason had been holding in for so long finally tumbled out in a ruse. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's part of a bet with Marianne. I didn't know it would be this much. His dad didn't say anything for a long moment, and Jason's heart pounded in his chest. What would happen now? Was this the end of the game? Would everything come crashing down? Jason stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest as his father's gas seemed to bore into him. The room felt smaller now, suffocating even. Marianne's earlier confidence had evaporated, and she stepped back, looking between the two of them. Jason's hands trembled, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about being caught anymore. It was about the emotional toll it had taken on him, about the journey he hadn't expected to embark on. His dad's face softened, a frown of confusion still lingering. Jason, I don't understand. Why are you dressed like this? Jason opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The fear was so overwhelming, crushing the words so desperately needed to say. Was this the moment everything fell apart? He glanced at Marianne, hoping for some support, but she simply stood there, as helpless as he felt. His dad shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. The air felt thick with tension, and every second seemed to stretch longer than the last. Is this something you've been hiding from me? He asked, his voice lower now, more concerned than angry. Did I do something wrong? Why are you? Jason couldn't bear it any longer. He had to say something, or it would spiral out of control. I didn't mean for this to happen, Jason said, his voice shaky. It's not what you think. It's a bet. Marianne, she dared me to dress up, and now it's... His voice trailed off, the words falling flat. It didn't sound convincing, not even to him. His dad took another step forward, his expression softening even more. Jason felt the tiniest glimmer of hope flicker within him. Maybe, just maybe, his dad bolded hood him. Maybe he would understand. But before Jason could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Everyone froze. The knock echoed loudly in the silent house, cutting through the tension like a knife. Jason's mind raced. Who else could it be? The timing couldn't have been worse. His dad turned to the door, confusion now replaced with a slight edge of annoyance. "Was that?" he asked, a touch of irritation creeping into his voice. Marianne looked nervously at Jason. He could see the panic in her eyes, but there was nothing they could do. The situation was spiraling out of control faster than they could stop it. The doorbell rang again, louder this time, followed by a voice. "Jason. Marianne. It's me, your Aunt Carol." Jason's stomach dropped. Aunt Carol. His father's sister. She lived nearby and had a bit of showing up unannounced. Of all the people to show up at this exact moment, it had to be her. Jason's mind raced. What would Aunt Carol think? What would she say? Was there any chance she could walk in and not notice the completely different version of Jason standing in front of her? Could they pretend it was a joke? His dad sighed, rubbing his forehead in frustration. Aunt Carol? Really? He muttered. Then, with an exasperated sigh, he walked toward the door. Jason's heart pounded harder than ever as he realized they had no time to change, no time to hide. Aunt Carol was about to walk in, and Jason's entire secret would be laid bare. "Dad? What?" Jason called out, but it was too late. His dad had already opened the door, revealing Aunt Carol standing on the other side. Jason's heart seemed to stop as he saw her reaction. Aunt Carol's eyes flicked over his dad first, before settling on Jason. Her gaze flickered, confusion giving way to a strange sort of recognition. She paused for a bit, then raised an eyebrow. "Jason," she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "What on earth are you wearing?" Jason's throat went dry. He could feel his world crumbling around him, the walls closing in with every passing second. This was it. He had been caught, exposed in a way he couldn't escape. But before Jason could even speak, Aunt Carol stepped into the room with a sly smile. "What's this about a bet?" she asked. her tones shifting from confusion to intrigue. You know, you always said you were an adventurous one. But this is something else. Her eyes swept over him again, taking in the dress, the heels, the makeup. Jason's father stepped in, his voice sharp. Carol, what is this? Why are you here? Aunt Carol raised her hands in mock surrender. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said, her eyes still fixed on Jason. But I couldn't help noticing something a bit out of place. Jason's dad looked at his sister with narrowed eyes, clearly irritated. This isn't the time, Carol. But Aunt Carol wasn't backing down. She stepped closer to Jason, her gaze sweeping over him with a knowing smile. I don't know, Dan, she said slowly. Maybe it's exactly the right time. I've got a feeling this might be more interesting than you think. Jason felt the hot rise in his cheeks as his words began to spin. What did she know? What was she thinking? Had she figured it out, or was she simply teasing him? Was this going to turn into something even worse? His dad turned back to him, a mix of concern and frustration on his face. Jason, he said, his voice low, you need to explain what's going on here. Jason's mind raced. There was no escaping this. His secret was out, and everything had spiraled too far for him to control it. He had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change forever.